Welcome to Blended Scotch Reviews and episode number 31. As we enter a slight detour from our regularly scheduled Blended Scotch Reviews for a Scotch Family Feud, second edition, coming to you from Fort Worth, Texas on Saturday, October 25th, 2025, where it is now finally fall. We have rain and 65 degrees. In fact, last night we had tornadoes, hail, and torrential downpours, and some more today. Typical fall. The next week or two, we'll be looking at the famous Grouse family to see if I can determine which one of the Grouses, Grouchi, is my favorite. We've previously done this with the Dewar's family. My method: I have already reviewed and studied the famous Grouse and the Ruby Cask, and then the other day we conducted our first one-on-one match between these two, with Ruby Cask losing to the famous Grouse, and that surprised me. So I will proceed with the reviews of Bourbon Cask Edition today, and then later next week, the Smoky Grouse. Then I'll conduct a one-on-one blind match between those two, and then we'll have a loser's bracket and a winner's bracket. So what I did with the Dewar's family is I had 4 different Dewars, and I just put them all in blacked out glasses and gave them a taste test to see if I could tell them apart and see if I could choose a winner, and it was a miserable failure. So I'm being more careful this time. So just the facts. This is a blended Scotch whiskey. Here you go. With an unknown number of whiskeys in the blend, but it weighs in at 40% ABV and costs $25.99 in Fort Worth for this 750 milliliter bottle, if it's still available. You know, I think it may be a ghost whiskey now. It's no longer listed on the famous Grouse website, so maybe they're phasing it out. Sadness. Tasting notes. The taste I get is really true to the nose. There's actually vanilla, caramel, touch of malt, a little bit of spiciness, some wood tannins going on there. I get a bit of fruit, perhaps apples and pears, maybe green grapes even. Really, this was a very nice pour. Really enjoyed it. A score of 85 and a letter grade for drinkability, a solid A. I would never hesitate to share a drink with somebody who offered me a famous Grouse bourbon cask. Absolutely. And so for Scotch drinkers who may be interested in crossing over to the bourbon world, I think this would be a good addition to maybe try to kind of get an intro to the bourbon world, because there are definitely bourbon notes here. And this is also a very good whiskey for bourbon drinkers who want to get into Scotch to make that transition. If you're a new whiskey drinker, this is a very sweet, mild, gentle whiskey. So I very highly recommend it. Details. Coming from Perth, Scotland in the early 1800s, the birthplace of a lot of whiskeys that would become famous blends, which we still drink today. When we studied Dewar's White, we saw that John Dewar was from Perth. When we studied Bell's Blend, we saw that Arthur Bell was also from Perth at about the same time. And preceding Bell and Dewar by a couple of decades was Matthew Gloag, another grocery store guy who dealt in wine and spirits. As a young man, Gloag was a butler and a cellarman in charge of handling the wine for Scone Palace in Perth, royalty. Scone Palace was the scene of Scottish kings for hundreds of years. As a grocer, he became quite successful, and then in 1842, Queen Victoria came to town, and she stayed at the Scone Palace, and Gloag's grocery got to cater the meals. There you go. Eventually, Gloag's son, William, took over the business, and William had many years' experience in business already. He loved quality whiskey, so it was a natural fit. The distilleries he was using to create the Gloag blend were Highland Park, Macallan, and Glenrothes. Perth was the gateway to the Highlands with the new railway line, and so tourism, fishing and hunting, grouse hunting, became a huge draw for traffic in Perth. Grouse is the game bird in Scotland that's related to the American pheasant and even turkey. Some of the larger varieties can get up to 12 or 14 pounds. By 1896, William Gloag's nephew, Matthew, who also had many years' experience in the wine industry, He came in and took over the business, and they had been producing Gloag's Perth whiskey, known for its attractive label that featured two famous Perth landmarks, the Smeaton Bridge over the River Tay and St. Matthew's Church. Now, I find it fascinating that as a Southern Baptist who used to be a teetotaler, a whiskey company that advertised using the image of a local church on their label. I find that fascinating. A whiskey that captured the spirit of its locale. But then in 1896, William Gloag changed the famous label and name of the whiskey to Grouse whiskey and put a drawing of a grouse that his daughter, Philippa, had drawn. I think changing the name from Gloag's Perth whiskey to Grouse whiskey was a good idea. Gloag's grog just doesn't sound appetizing. I don't know. In 1905, Matthew Gloag changed things up again. In the UK, the date August 12th is a holiday, as it's the opening day of hunting season, much like September 1st here in Texas is the opening of dove season. So grouse season, August 12th. On that day in 1905, Gloag changed the name of the whiskey again to the famous Grouse. And he kept the glorious red grouse on the label to deliberately market their whiskey to the sportsmen coming to the Scottish Highlands. The brand stayed in the family through ups and downs of the Scottish whiskey industry until 1970, when tragedy struck and the Gloag family lost the current elders of the family, and the inheritor, named appropriately Matthew Gloag, was faced with a new inheritance tax from the government, which could not be paid, so he had to sell the family business to Highland Distillers, with whom the family had done business for many years, over a century. Taxes. Highland added some needed heft to the marketing, and the famous Grouse started growing rapidly, and by 1979, the brand was the #1 selling brand in Scotland, where it has remained to this day. In 1999, Highland Distillers was purchased by the Edrington Group, which itself was privately owned, not a huge public company. And so besides owning Cutty Sark, the Edrington Group owns the same two distilleries that have been a part of the famous Grouse, Highland Park and the Macallan. In 2024, the brand was sold to William Grant and Sons, another privately held company. Still, this may change up which brands of whiskey go into the blend. This release of the Bourbon Cask dates back to 2018, the Edrington days, but now looks to be discontinued because I don't see it on their website anymore. So 5 out of 5 points for history for the famous Grouse. This Bourbon Cask, though, only dates to 2018. Bottle, label, and marketing. The bottle, again, is round with straight walls, with the shoulder being shaped kind of like a saddle. It's got a short neck, screw-on cap, and the bottle has established 1800 embossed, along with Matthew Gloag's signature, but established 1800. You know, that's the date of the original Gloag's birth, I guess. William Gloag. The label has always featured the famous grouse, game bird of Scotland, as well as local scenery. So it's a very attractive label. Each of the Grouse editions has a different color scheme. So here's the famous Grouse. It's got a black neckband and cap and some black down on there on the label. This is kind of a reddish brown color. And then the Ruby Cask that we looked at the other day is more of a reddish color there. And the boxes are similarly colored. So here's the Ruby Cask box. And then the Bourbon Cask matches colors. So all that is an extra touch of class, as well as expense, I'm sure. Marketing, I've not seen any specific marketing for the Bourbon Cask, although a few years ago here in Dallas-Fort Worth area, Local conservative talk radio station, WBAP, 820 on your dial, did have some famous Grouse commercials going on for about a year or two. Bottle label and marketing, and there's just very few reviews of this. So bottle label and marketing, 5 of 5 for bottle label and marketing. Appearance, here in the bottle, let's compare it with the regular famous Grouse. And there's not hardly any difference at all. Can't really discern much of a difference, but the Ruby cask, there is, the port wine influence, it is noticeably darker. In the glass, right there is the bourbon cask. So that's fairly light. That's a 2 out of 5. 2 points. Composition. While there is no list of how many whiskeys go into this blend that I have been able to find, the single malts listed include Highland Park, the Macallan, and Glen Ross. And we have some Glen Ross here that maybe we'll get to sample that later. I looked for, which bourbon casks they used for this whiskey. And the only clue I could come up with is the Edrington Group also owns Wyoming Whiskey Company. And it is in Wyoming, Wyoming, USA. And so that they make bourbon there. So it would be logical to use the bourbon cask from another company that you owned. So, but I couldn't find any confirmation of that. And I wasn't going to buy Wyoming bourbon just for this, because didn't know for sure. So composition, it's a blend, so it's got single malts and it's got grain whiskeys going on there. So 13 out of 15 for composition. Now let's nose this whiskey. It really has a pleasant nose. And I actually, maybe my nose is finally getting trained. I've gone for years without being able to smell vanilla. And here lately I'm smelling vanilla. And this has got some vanilla in it from the bourbon cask. It's got sweetness, touch of caramel, again, a bourbon note. I'm still getting some maltiness as well. It's really a very pleasant nose. It's just a tad faint, but stronger than most. So 8 out of 10. But yeah, that vanilla actually is nice. I like that. All right, let's taste this. And the taste is true to the nose. It leads with vanilla and caramel. You do get a touch of the malt. A little bit spicy. Again, that's kind of a bourbon thing. I mean, single malts have it too, but some wood notes. I do get a bit of fruit. Apples, pears, green grapes, maybe. All in all, this is a very nice pour. 23 out of 25. I mean, I really do like that. Mouthfeel, burn, and finish. It's got a decent mouthfeel. It's not going to be thin for me. I mean, different people have different standards, but there's no real burn, unfortunately. It does have some very nice mouth tingles that get close to a burn. There's nothing that goes up, nothing that goes down. Doesn't really get in the back of the throat. It does leave you with some tingles. The finish has still got vanilla going on, some wood notes and caramel. It's a nice medium finish. Yeah, the wood notes, a little bit of tannin, bitterness going on there, which is pleasant for me. I like that. Mouthfeel, burn, and finish, 12 out of 15. Now, neat or mixer. I definitely like this neat, which is how I prefer to drink. The Grouse are mostly unpeated, and I tend not to want to put these into cocktails. I did try the famous Grouse with ginger ale, and it failed miserably. I really did. But then, night before last or so, I tried something with a 7-Up. I think it was, yeah, it was this one. Yeah, I tried this one with 7-Up on ice, and this actually worked. And so I'm not sure the difference between this and the regular famous Grouse with ginger ale, but this actually worked with 7-Up. And my wife even liked it. So for neat or mixer, I would say this holds together enough to use as a mixer, at least in something simple, like with 7-Up. So 5 out of 5 for neat or mixer. Price, value, and availability. Goody Goody in Fort Worth still has it listed for $25.99. But it's listed doesn't mean it's in the stores. Specs and Total Wine, neither one has this edition. And it's no longer listed on the Grouse website. So I hate to say it, but this may be a ghost whiskey now. And I'm a famous Grouse fan. I've liked all these, and I really like this one. So I hate to see it go. But so it's only 7 points out of 10 because of availability issues. If you can find it, buy it. Bonus points. Again, I really like this edition. I love the history. The bottle, label, and box, and all of that's good. Showed some versatility with the cocktail as well. So 5 bonus points out of 5 for sure. And that gives me a total score of 85. Letter grade for drinkability is an A, a solid A. You know, a lot of people complain about blended scotches and whine about them, but I've been a fan of blended scotch for a while. I mean, I might actually prefer the blends to the single malts, but that's just me. Here is the Glen Ross. So we're going to do a single malt reveal, and we're going to taste this and see if I can discern anything in here remotely related to the famous Grouse. So here's the box that the Glen Ross comes in. There you go. And that was close to $70 here in Fort Worth. So here's the Glen Ross. You can hold it up and see that it's really no darker than the famous Grouse. It's about the same. And it does not have as good of a nose as that bourbon cask. I'm getting just some vague maltiness. So yeah, I'm going to say that famous Grouse bourbon cask has got a richer nose, for sure. More diverse nose, complex. All right, Glen Ross, 12-year. This is a Speyside. It is not peated in any way. It's got kind of the typical Speyside gentle flavors going on, but you're getting some sweetness, maltiness, a little bit of wood tannins. That's a good pour, but I'm telling you, I prefer that famous Grouse bourbon, that bourbon cask. Between these two, for $26 versus $70, hands down, prefer the famous Grouse. And this is not bad. This is, enjoyable, pretty good. I just don't view it as cost effective. I don't know. So, it's a decent pour. I'm glad I've got it, but I'll never get that again. Whereas the famous Grouse, yeah, I'll get all the editions I find. All right, my analysis and recommendation. I came into the Scotch world from bourbon, so this bourbon cask is a natural fit for me. But again, it looks like this edition of the Grouse may be coming to an end, which is a shame because I consider this to be very good. It's a nice gentle whiskey with a little to no burn. The bourbon notes are clearly there. So consequently, for Scotch drinkers who may be interested in moving into bourbon, this would be a great place to start if you can find it. If you're a bourbon guy wanting to move into Scotch, this would be a good transition whiskey. And as gentle as this is, if you are new to whiskey, this would be a good recommendation. All right, next up, what's coming up next? The Smoky Grouse. That's the one we'll review next. All right, for now, this is Blended Scotch Reviews with Family Feud number 2 out here.